puff on top of the hive. I open the hive then, and I can give them a puff of smoke from on top of the hive, and you'll see them all dive down inside, and they're gorging themselves with honey. They're just eating all the honey they possibly can eat. And the theory behind that is they think it's because they know there's a forest fire coming or something, or they believe there's a forest fire coming. So now they have to have enough energy to be able to fly away. The honey gives them the energy to fly away as far as they can and start a new nest. Unfortunately, the queen will probably not go with them, and
So they don't do anything until the female tells them what to do.
no, not quite. I'll explain
It's
the whole
not real life,
process.
Barbara.
I'll explain the whole process, but yes, you're right, it's the females who decide everything in the hive.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah. So what we have is a bottom board, and you can see that it's wide open at that end there. That would be the entrance to their hive. And what we do is we have what we call a brood chamber, which is down below the hive. And what we do is we give them a wax foundation or plastic foundation like that. Now I've taken a paint roller with beeswax and I made it nice so I want them to do it nice and straight. I should have brought one along to show you. They're a little stubborn sometimes. They'll make everything zigzaggy and it's no good to us.
It's hard to get it all.
Yeah, we can't really manage it very well. So anyway, we normally have two boxes like that, which would be what we call the brood chamber. The eggs, the larvae, the pupa are in there. What happens, I'll just explain very briefly. The queen can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. So that means there's 2,000 bees hatching every day. She is the only, inside the hive, there can be up to 60,000 bees in midsummer. And they're all female workers. And there's one queen, and all her job is to lay eggs. And like I say, she can lay 2,000 eggs a day. The worker bees have different jobs depending on their age. And then there's drones. The drones are the male bees. They don't do anything. They don't feed themselves. They don't clean the hive. They do nothing. They don't even have stingers. They can't even defend the hive. They're useless to the hive. Their only job is to mate for the virgin queen.
This sounds like a really good picture until the
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah, I'll explain it all to you. So, so the drones are there just to mate for the virgin queen. And we have what we call drone congregation areas. Nobody's been able to figure out why, but they choose the same area every year and they'll come from a few kilometers away. And they'll just congregate and hover around 50 feet or more above ground. They just hover around, the drones. And the female, somehow she finds them and finds this drone congregation area, and she'll fly through and she'll mate with up to 15 or 20 drones. Not necessarily in the same day, but she'll mate with up to 15 or 20 of them. And she has a little sac in her body called a spermatheca, and she'll store the sperm from those drones in that little sac. And that can last her for there's millions and millions of sperm there. And she'll store, she has enough to last for 3 years, 4 years. They found them as long as 5 years old, the queens can survive and still be viable. And I'll continue on in a second, and I'll give you a little bit of sex talk in a minute. So anyway, what we do,
I guess that's where it came from.
like this would be normally 2 boxes because she can lay enough eggs that she can have the brood in all those boxes. Now the brood is the eggs, the larvae, and the pupa. So what we do on top of those 2 boxes, which is her domain, she can lay all the eggs and roam around all she wants. But we put this, what we call a queen excluder on there. She's too big to fit through there, but all the worker bees are smaller than her, so they can fit through. The reason she's so big is her abdomen is really well developed because she's the only one whose ovaries are developed. And it's very large too. And she doesn't just have I think most females have 2 ovaries, but not her. She has hundreds of ovaries, 100 ovaries or more. And each one will produce eggs, so that's why she can lay 2,000 eggs a day. So we put the queen excluder on so she can't go up because we don't want her up in our honey. We call these boxes supers, by the way, in French, hausse, and hausse à miel. But we put honey supers on above that. And I forgot to bring some stuff, but what we give them is wax foundation. You can just pass that around if you like. It's a little dainty. I should have brought a full frame of honey for you to show you the difference
Yeah.
in weight.
He just started, this is my neighbor who just started with these in
Oh,
the
yeah.
summer.
So we just give them a wax foundation. It's got the imprint of the hexagon on it. Abraham's already seen that.
I've seen it, yeah.
So that gives them a hint of how we want them to build their honeycomb. And they do. Now this is a little bit dainty. You don't want to be poking too hard at that, but that's what we want them to do. Nice and straight as drawn comb. And last year that was full of honey, and I uncapped the
The other way.
when the bees
The other way.
upside down. Yeah. When the bees bring the nectar in, they dehydrate it to 18%, 17 or 18% moisture. When they get it down to 17 or 18%, then they cap it over with wax, and that will keep forever. It never, ever, ever spoils. They found it in the tombs of Egypt. You could eat it today like you could thousands of years ago, and it's all the same. Anyway, so they cap it over with wax, and as long as moisture doesn't hit that honey, it will never ferment. But if you get moisture on it, yes, of course, it's going to dilute it and it'll ferment. But it won't ferment at 17%. So anyway, we come along and we uncap that, and we have a centrifuge that spins around, and it tosses the honey out of the honeycomb. Because if you actually look at that honeycomb, it looks all nice, straight and horizontal, but it's actually at a 9-degree angle. And what happens is they can put their honey in there right to the bottom of the cell, dehydrate it, and put some more in, dehydrate it, and when it gets out near the top, then they start capping the bottom of the cells so the honey won't pour out. And it doesn't pour out very much at 18% or 17% moisture. So it's actually, those are facing me, like a 9-degree angle. So we put that in the extractor, spins around quite fast, and tosses the honey out, and there's a tap on the bottom where we take the honey off. Yeah, so how do we get the honey out?
How long does it take to fill it? How often?
They can fill one of these in less than a week. Yeah, they can bring in 6 or 7 pounds of honey a day. A good strong hive. This is a gadget. When we want to take the honey off, there would be probably 2 or 3, maybe even 4 of these honey supers on top of the hive. And the bees can go up there and store the honey. And there's no pollen up there, there's no larvae, there's no eggs, there's nothing. The queen can't get up there. So they don't want to, they always store the pollen where the queen is, where the brood is, that the queen is produced. Anyway, to get the honey super off, we come along and take the honey supers off and put this gadget on. And I would take that queen excluder off at that point in time. Oh yeah, and another thing is, once they fill 1 box of honey, we can take that queen excluder off, then they have free reign. They can really move up and down in there without having to go through that screen. And they're much better, much more agile at it. So we take that honey queen excluder off and let the bees run free up there. The queen never walks across honey. She won't go up if there's honey up above. She'll stay down in her brood nest. She doesn't, for some reason, she just won't go up there. No matter if there's empty combs up there or not, she won't go up. Anyway, so it's a lot faster for them to fill it without having to go through that screen, because it is a job for them to squeeze through there. Anyway, what happens with this is, I'll leave it on for 24 to 48 hours, usually 2 days is good enough. And what it is, they can go down, but it's a maze for them and they can't find their way back up again. And in 48 hours, there's no more bees in my queen, in my honey supers. So now I can take them home in the evening when the bees aren't flying and there's no bees in there, put them in my honey house, warm them up to, hive temperature is always 95, 94, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. That's, the bees keep it at that. Yeah, so I can take it home, heat it up to 80 degrees or whatever, a little bit more than room temperature, and put it in the extractor and it comes flailing out. And that's it, that's the honey production part of it. And yeah, to finish it off, we have in the hive, we have the inner fur, because they glue everything down. They have a product they call propolis, and it's the resin from trees, from the buds off trees, and that's how trees heal their wounds, is with this resin that they give off. If a tree gets wounded by whatever, a woodpecker picks at it or something, well, it'll heal itself with this resin that they give off. And that is antiseptic, antibiotic, anti-American, and anti-everything else you want. It's a fantastic product. It's just, like for example, the buds on trees in the springtime, when they come out, they have this resin on them. Because if they didn't have that resin, don't forget it's antibiotic and antiseptic, if they didn't have that on there, the microbes in the atmosphere would get at those buds, whether it's a flower bud or a leaf bud, they would get at it and it would just rot. You know, they would start chewing on it and just rot. So that's what protects the buds on trees, and they'll collect that also. And that is like a glue. They'll glue everything together with it. They glue everything down. So if I just had a cover on it, the cover would be glued to it and I wouldn't be able to lift it off. Now the cover is normally not glued because of this. They don't come up here to put their glue in, they just stay inside the hive. So the cover I can put it on and it won't have that glue on. And I can come into the hive then and it'll be glued down. We have a hive tool that we just get in the corner of it and prop it up and it'll prop up for us. That's how we managed to get it off. Anyway, then comes the telescoping outer cover. And like I say, there can be 4 of those honey supers on quite easily in a good hive in the summertime. Especially if you only have 1 or 2 hives, right?
Yeah.
Still today, huh?
Yeah.
Oui. Yeah. So you can have like I normally keep 60 hives in a yard. I was up to 280 hives, so I had to spread them out someplace. Put 30 hives in a yard. But they would still bring in 100 pounds of honey. But in a yard by yourself, without not too many other bees around, you'll probably collect 100 or 125 pounds of honey from each hive. Yeah. Yeah, so I just burned this pine needles for the smoker. That's all I use for that. And there's also the other hive. Oh yeah, by the way, there's a Dr. Luc Boudreau down at the University of Moncton. He's working with this propolis as not a cure, but make it easier on you, for arthritis. Yeah, I don't know how he's going to get it into his patients. He's a PhD, but he's a pain doctor. That's the best way I can describe it.
Maybe it's like an anti-inflammatory.
An anti-inflammatory, exactly. And I'm not sure how he's going to deliver it, whether it's going to be a rub-down thing or whether he can actually ingest it. But apparently this propolis, my wife used to chew it all the time. It's good for canker sores, good for sore throat.
They use it in toothpaste.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yes, they do.
So it's a fantastic product, you know, and they're doing lots of things. They make tinctures for canker sores.
I've heard tell of a mouse getting in and then the bees stinging it to death and then covering
Oh, yeah.
the propolis.
Yeah,
That way it's contained.
what happens is this propolis, don't
So it
forget,
doesn't rot.
yeah, this propolis is, yeah, they get a mouse, but they can't drag it out when they kill it. They'll sting it to death, but they can't drag it out. So they propolize it, and then there's no odors or anything that come off it or anything. And they actually used it in tombs of Egypt for mummifying the mummies.
Wow.
Propolis. Yeah, and pro is in front of propolis, the city, in front of the city. That's a Greek, that's where it comes from, Greek, in front of the city, or in front of their home. You know, so propolis, that's where it comes from. Yeah, so the other thing in the hive, well, there's other products too. There's the honey, there's the wax, the beeswax. I melt it down, I just scrape it off. They'll build the stuff all over the place, and there are places I don't want them to build it. And it comes out pretty dirty. You know, it's got cocoons in there and everything else. So I just scrape that off.
How often would you clean that up?
Every time I'm in the hive, I'll pull anything that's built where I don't want it to be built, I'll scrape it off. And you can see how kind of messy it is there. And I melt it down a couple of more times, and I pour it into a milk container, and you can see how nice and clean it comes out.
They make great candles.
Yeah, great candles. This is food grade wax, so you can make lip balm and then skin creams and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
it
can
smells
sell
really
it.
great.
So this is just, you take the wax, you just melt it down, you filter it, or just
No,
melt it
what
down.
happens is
You can
the
take a
wax
bite of that.
always floats to the
Oh,
surface.
really?
Whatever's in it, everything goes to the bottom. I usually put
Oh, it
water in
smells
the
good.
pan.
Yeah,
and melt
if
it
you
down
get
because I
the
don't want it to
honeycomb
overheat. I don't want it to catch
with
fire.
honey in it, you
That's
can
caught
just eat
fire
the
on me
whole
more
honey.
than one
Oh,
time.
nice.
Like
Lesson
2
learned.
lessons, sweet, and you
So I
spit
learned a
out
few
the wax.
lessons.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, remember we used to go to someplace over in Upper Coverdale to get beeswax?
Yeah, that's George Wheatley's place. It used to be, how long ago was it? It was,
It was Jody.
yeah,
Late 80s.
Yeah, it was
late 80s, yeah. I
I
started
had a little
there.
dip shop and I used to go up there and buy candles.
Yeah, and about that time, in the late 80s, that would have been Lloyd Bates.
Okay.
Yeah. He's an
Big
old
old
timer.
White House.
Yeah.
on the upper
Yeah,
side.
he's gone now, yeah. His niece, but they've just retired from it. The store has been sold and
That's after it's refined a
That's
little
just the pollen that they've collected, that's.
yeah, that's what gives it the color. Yeah, because wax, I should have brought some with me, I never
No,
thought.
sorry, what,
The smell
like
of,
the smell of it,
Yeah,
will they differ depending on the flowers? that
I
they've
can't
taken?
notice any difference.
Yeah,
I
so
think it's
it's
the
always-
smell of the oils or whatever in the wax itself. I'm not sure what it is, but they all smell the same to me. I can't tell the
Okay.
difference.
bit. The wax is still made from honey.
Right, what I'm getting at is, I guess I'm not explaining it properly, but you, like say, for example, like if you took clover versus buckwheat, like that flavor
No,
is gonna be
I don't,
different? It's not
no,
gonna-
I don't think so.
No.
No.
But you're getting different flavors, but not different.
The honey
scents.
will have a different flavor, definitely have a different flavor. I brought some fresh honey here, whether we'll have a taste of that in a few minutes there. But
because when you go to buy honey, like in the grocery store or somewhere, it will say on it clover, lots of times it.
yeah, I don't know where they get clover honey for, because now the type of farming is done, when the clover comes in blossom, they mow it.
That's right.
That's when it's at its best value, and then they silage it.
Yeah.
So I don't know where they get clover honey from. They're saying they got clover honey, but it's just like Manuka honey from New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's a famous honey. It's got all kinds of medicinal properties to it. Honey is also a good healer, healer of wounds.
Well, we have a young Paul who was really young, he got a really bad eye.
Yeah,
And what did we mix the honey with? Iodine.
yeah, you make a
Please.
poultice out of it.
We cleaned it, we couldn't put anything on to stick,
Yeah.
but we would try to make it thick enough that it would stick long enough, and it healed, it was amazing.
Yeah.
I use honey instead of anything else on cuts.
Yeah.
It's antiseptic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Unpasteurized.
And not only that, but
That's right.
Unpasteurized.
when you put honey on, it actually gives why it is such a good healer. And apparently, you don't even scar from it. You won't see a scar after it's healed.
Well, different on a horse, I guess,
Yeah.
but,
Because of the hair,
it
yeah.
was so deep, the cut, they couldn't stitch it,
Yeah.
and it almost went through his intestine.
Oh, wow.
But it took us a couple of weeks, twice a day, to wash, hose it out,
Yeah.
as long as we could, and then pat that in.
Yeah.
Then a little bit later, we used another product that kind of pulled the flesh together.
See, the honey, when you put it on a wound like that, an open wound, it gives off hydrogen peroxide. So that's that's what kills the antiseptic. That's the antiseptic part of it. Yeah, it's pretty fantastic, and they're really getting into this medicine thing again. That used to be the healer for everything back in the old days, back centuries ago. They used honey to do everything. Yeah.
I wonder how they did a hive way, like,
Oh, back then, yeah, they had what modern beekeeping only started in 1851. It was a Reverend Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth. A standard hive today is called a Langstroth hive. He's the father of modern beekeeping. He discovered inside a hive there's a space that is 9 millimeters, or 3/8 of an inch, and you cannot violate that space. And why the scientists today think that that space is because two bees can work back to back. One work in that frame, one work in that frame, and they can work each frame. And that's why they claim that that's the size of a bee space. And he discovered that. And when he discovered that, he also discovered that removable frames at the same time. He came out with a removable frame hive. But before that, they used to just gas the bees. They'd give it a poison gas and take the honey off and squeeze it out. However they did it, I don't know. But they used straw skeps in particular, made of straw and wound
I've
up.
seen
Yeah,
pictures
you see
of,
on
yeah.
you see on the
Well, even on some labels.
yeah.
There'll be something like
Yeah,
that.
the corn syrup,
Yes,
honey brand corn syrup or whatever they
Yeah,
call it.
yeah.
You'll see a straw skep on that. Yeah, and even here in New Brunswick, back in the mid-70s, or before the mid-70s, or back in those days, everything was fine. You could go and buy bees down in the United States and everything.
Yeah.
But then the diseases started to crop in on us and then close the borders and all that. But even here in New Brunswick, the guy who mentored me used to kill his bees in the fall and put package bees in the spring to get going again. They just killed the bees.
yeah.
Took the honey, and that was it. And then in the spring, they could buy packages of honey from the United States for $5 a package, a 2-pound package of bees with a queen. So then they could reboot their business in the
You
fall.
see in lots of border crossings between provinces,
Yeah,
there's no bees.
yeah. That's a little bit political sometimes.
So, Paul, what kind of bees go into your hive?
Okay, the honeybees are not native to North America. The settlers brought them over from Europe with them. The first bees they brought over were European bees. They were called the German black bee or the European bee, mainland Europe and England. And they were pretty defensive bees. They wouldn't let you around their hive. You know. Then they discovered that the Italian bees are much calmer than the European bees. So now the majority of bees throughout North America are Italian bees. Mine are not. Mine came from Yugoslavia. Because of the mountain ranges and the waters that separate countries, they've developed a certain, they've evolved to become used to that, how do you say it? Darwin could tell you better than me, but
Temperature fluctuations.
no, yeah, their environment, they could get used to their own environment. Now, in Yugoslavia, that's the Balkan area, and their temperature is much closer to what we have here in North America, in our part of North America. The bees are black, jet black. The queens are jet black. Therefore, they can absorb the sun and go out earlier in the morning and stay out later at night than the Italian bees. Italian bees are almost golden color, golden and brownish red, and they're good honey producers. They're fairly tame, they're pretty tame, but these carniolan bees that I have, it's Apis mellifera. Apis is a genus of the bee. Apis mellifera, mellifera, the honey-bearing bee. And it's the only one that gathers enough carbohydrate that they store and they keep it to survive through the winter. They'll eat the honey, it'll give them the energy to shiver their wing muscles and give off a heat to keep the hive warm. They're the only insect that does that. All the other insects hibernate. The queens hibernate. They come out in the spring and start a new nest. bees stay alive all winter. They have to have about, in our climate, about 50 pounds of honey in the hive to survive. Yeah, so where am I at? Forget.
So do you keep the same bees year after year?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like this year I went through my hives and I found some queens that were blue. I paint them, by the way. I paint a dot on their thorax.
So you know one from the other?
Yeah, and the idea is why you read good books. Y, white. U, yellow. R, red. G, green. B, blue. And Y. No, white, yeah, okay. So it's year 1 and year 6 is white, and then et cetera, down the list. So last year they were blue, this year they're white. So this year, all the queens I have that I've raised myself, I painted them with a white dot, and I'll know they're this year's queens. And you want to go into the winter with new queens, brand new queens in your hive in the autumn. In August, you got to have a queen that's really laying a lot of eggs, because that's what's going to keep your hive alive during the winter. Winter bees are different than summer bees. A summer bee only lasts for 6 weeks. They spend 3 weeks inside the hive doing their chores, whatever they do. First chore for a little bee when it hatches out. After a day or two, and it feeds itself and it gets going, its first chore is to clean out the honeycomb, so the queen can lay an egg in there. She won't lay an egg in a dirty comb. She wants it nice and clean and polished with propolis to disinfect it inside there, so before she'll lay an egg in there. So anyway, that's the first job of a little baby bee. And as they mature, they have glands in their head called the hypopharyngeal gland and the mandibular gland. And with those glands, they produce an enzyme. And they'll chew honey and pollen and mix it all up and put these enzymes into it, and it becomes royal jelly. And that's what they feed to the larva, royal jelly, for the first 3 days of the little larva's life. I better get into the sex of the bee first before I get into that. I'll get back to that. The bees, the drones. Like I said, their only job is to mate with the virgin queen, and that's their job. Unfortunately, as Andre pointed out, in the fall of the year, the worker bees don't tolerate them. They'll stop feeding them, they'll bite them, they'll chase them out of the hive. They either freeze to death or they starve to death. No boys in the hive in the wintertime. It'd be a waste of their stores, the honey stores. They would be eating honey and doing nothing. So they get rid of them. And in the spring of the year, I have to buy bees from offshore. I got to get them from Australia, New Zealand, Northern California. Now we're allowed to bring them in from there. Chile and Hawaii. My queens came from Hawaii this year, but they were $50 a piece.
Oh my goodness.
So in the spring of the year, I feed my bees to stimulate the queen. Like about Easter time, you look around, there's not a flower in sight. The bees are flying, coming out of the hive and flying around looking for something. So what I do, I didn't bring a feeder with me. I should have. I did I? Anyway, I was doing this presentation yesterday and I had a feeder. I have a feeder that sits on top. I put straw in there so they can go up out of the hive into the feeder and back down into the hive without having to go inside. I put straw in there so they don't drown. They can walk along the straw, it floats, and they eat the sugar syrup, and then they go back down in the hive. Well, that stimulates the queen. They think there's actually an income of nectar at that point. It stimulates the queen. They feed her really well. And they should have pollen that they've stored from last fall. Or we can give them a pollen substitute also that's manufactured. Yeah, so that stimulates her to get going. And by the first week of May, these things are boiling over. So then we can split our hive. That's why I run with 2 boxes. I take one box, set it aside. Oh, by the way, how do I find the queen without looking for her? With 60,000 bees, I mean, it's pretty fun, you know. I'm pretty good at finding queens, but not that good, you know. So I put this queen excluder between the 2 boxes in the springtime. About near the end of April, I'll put the queen excluder on, and then I'll go back into the hive 4 or 5 days later. Because when the queen lays an egg, it hatches in 3 days, after 3 days. On day 4, it's hatched. It's a tiny little larva. And incidentally, this little larva puts on over 1,000 times its weight in 7 days from the feeding that they give them. Yeah, so anyway, I put the queen excluder between my 2 boxes, and I'll go back on day 5 or day 4 and look up top, and if there's no eggs up top, they're all hatched out. The queen's down bottom. If there's eggs up top, she's up top. So I just move the hive and put it right back in the spot where she was, and take the other hive and move it away. Take it out of the yard altogether. That way all the bees are in their stay. If I kept that second box there, the bees would fly back to where they came from, where they're used to flying into, where home is today. So I want to move it away out of the yard. And so I know there's no queen over there, so I'll give them a queen. But you can't just drop a queen in there. She's got to be in a cage. And we put her in a cage with a candy. I should have brought all these props with me. I got one in the truck. But she's in a cage with a candy made out of icing sugar and honey that you heat up, and you mix it up till it gets really, really stiff. And you plug it up with that. Now, you put it in a hive, if you drop her in there, they're going to kill her. She's a stranger. They don't accept strangers. So you put her in the hive, in the cage, and they'll chew through that candy. It takes them about 24 to 48 hours. 48 hours probably to chew through that candy. By that time, they've gotten used to her pheromones. She gives off pheromones. They get used to her pheromones and they'll accept her. One mistake that beekeepers do is these bees come with attendant bees inside the cage with them. They've got to get rid of those attendant bees because it can take up to 6 days before they stop being hostile to whatever's in that cage. So they don't like these foreign bees in the hive, and it'll take up to 6 days. People complain to me sometimes, and they'll buy, like I buy bees from Hawaii, and I just pass them off to other people. They're $50. Take them or leave. They're yours. So they'll take them. They were no good queens. They're all dead. Nothing had happened. Did you take the worker bees out of them? No. Well, it takes them 2 days to chew through the candy, and it takes 6 days before they'll accept them. And they start fighting with these bees that are in the cage, and the queen gets caught in the crossfire, and she's gone. So that's why they lose the queens. Anyway, and this is all research that has been done by PhDs at universities, especially down in the United States. They're fantastic. So anyway, we're up to there. The sex. The drones, like I said, don't do anything. They're just there to mate to the virgin queen. And these drone congregation areas, wherever they find them, I don't know how they find them, or why they go to that place every year. But I did find one myself. But there are people that do go searching for them. They'll tie a helium balloon on and they'll tether a queen on a piece of string from that balloon and let her kind of flop around. And you see a column of bees going after it. Hey, this is a drone congregation area. Anyway, they'll walk around, the countryside for miles until they can find one. But now with these drones, these manipulated drones that you can put up, they're using them, but the long, long tethers so the wind doesn't bother them. And they're not using live queens, they're using queen pheromones that can be artificially produced. So that's what they use.
So the drones, can you get rid of the drones in a hive? Like if it's after the mating is done, can you get rid of them?
No, the bees will take care of that. We've never.
No, I mean, would the hive be okay in the summer without the drones in it?
Oh yeah, they don't produce anything.
Okay.
And they'll drift from hive to hive, and they're accepted. The bees will accept drones during the summer.
Okay.
They know they need drones. Yeah, so that's the drone, and the life of the drone is the summer, and the females kick them out of the hive in the fall. The female bee, she's born from a fertilized egg. When the queen puts her abdomen down into the cell to lay the egg, the sperm comes down, the egg comes down past the spermatheca, and it picks up the sperm, and then she lays it. Now it's a fertilized egg. That will become a female worker bee. I always have trouble trying to explain this, but in the spring of the year, the bees know that they need drones to mate with the queens in the summertime. So they build the cells a little bit bigger and a little bit deeper. Drone cells are bigger and deeper than the worker cells. So when the queen puts her abdomen down into the cell to lay that egg, there's a little valve that shuts off the spermatheca. The egg comes down and it's laid, but no sperm is connected to it. So it's an unfertilized egg. A drone is born from an unfertilized egg. So if you don't believe in virgin birth, there it is. But it can only be a male. And the other thing is, as I say, if your granddaughter or your daughter comes home someday and says, Granny, I'm pregnant, but honest to God, I wasn't sleeping with a boy, she could be telling the truth. So, you never know. Anyway, yeah, so that's how a male is born. And the process is called parthenogenesis. That's how that egg can split its cells to build the body. That's what's called parthenogenesis. I've read about it, I can't explain it. Ask a scientist. Yeah, so that's how the drone is. So he doesn't have a father, but he's got a grandfather on his mother's side, because she had to have a father. So, when they want to make a queen, this is the one. When they want to make a queen, if they lose the queen within hours, they know. There's no pheromones coming out of the queen. They know they don't have a queen. So what they do is they'll they'll select a young larva, a day-old larva, more than one, probably a dozen or more. And they'll build a whole bunch of queen cells. Now a queen cell hangs down in the hive like a peanut. It looks like a peanut. And it hangs down. They'll feed, because the first 3 days of the young larva's life, they feed them nothing but royal jelly. They just feed them royal jelly. But after day 3, on day 4, they start feeding what we call bee bread. And it's honey and pollen, but a different enzyme that they put into it. And we call it bee bread or brood food. So they just develop into regular working worker bee, female worker bee. But the queen, they don't stop feeding this royal jelly. And they'll feed her royal jelly all the time and I better explain also, on day 4, that larva hatches. On day 9, they cap it over. So from day 4 to day 9, when it hatches, they put on, like I say, 1,000 times the weight. On the queen, it's all the same. They'll keep feeding her royal jelly, but they'll also pack a whole whack of royal jelly
And who's doing this?
in herself, the worker bees.
The worker bees, right.
Yeah, that's a different stage of their life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure when that begins. It could be after they mature from the first stage of cleaning the cells, then they mature to these glands kick in, and then they can feed royal jelly to the larva. We call them the nurse bees. And after that, we get the wax producers. And the wax producers, the platelets in their bodies, this stuff oozes out. It's a liquid when it oozes out, but when it hits the oxygen in the air, it solidifies into wax. And you can see the platelets, and they're, how would I explain it, the size of a freckle. You can really see the little flecks of wax. Especially when you catch a swarm, if they've been there for a day or two, the bees will start making wax, and you can see where they've left. You can see the little flakes of wax there. Yeah.
Does any of this happen in the wild?
Oh yeah, these bees, that's where they get them from, it's from the wild.
Yeah, okay.
And when they swarm, they normally nest in trees, an old hollowed out tree that maybe it was struck by lightning and the core got killed in the tree or whatever. Or a woodpecker was in there,
Yeah.
made a big cavity in there. That's where their normal nesting sites are. Yeah, so the females they stop eating royal jelly. Now the queen, because of the amino acids that make the proteins that are in this royal jelly, it causes the queen to develop differently. You are what you eat. And because of all these more rich amino acids that are in there, her ovaries develop, where all the other worker bees, her ovaries are not developed. They have ovaries, they're not developed. And she can mate. She's built to be able to mate with the drone. Stinger. The bees have all the female bees have a stinger. The males don't. The drones don't have a stinger. Female bees have a stinger, but they have barbs in their stinger, so that when they sting you, they die. It gets torn from their body and they die. The queen does not have any barbs in her stinger, because her job, the first queen that hatches, her job is to go around all her competitors in there, all of the other queen cells. She'll go and sting through those queen cells, kill that queen in there, and then the bees will tear the cell apart and drag the body out and get rid of it. So that's the queen's job. And what they do, comically, is they do some piping. It's like the normal buzz of a hive is all the time. Now her is and she does that with her wings, because they don't make sound. And this piping is conveyed through the honeycomb. They feel the vibrations of the honeycomb. They can't hear, they don't have ears.
Yeah.
And queens inside the cells will answer that. So that, they listen, where'd that come from? But they'll find the other cells that way, and they'll sting through the cell. That's how they find it. Or maybe two of them hatch at the same time, or roughly the same time, and they haven't met up with each other yet. When they meet up, it's a battle to the death. Only one survives. So, that's that. And so when they go, here's the life of the drone now. Either they get kicked out by the females in the fall, or they get lucky and they get to mate with a female in flight. They always mate in flight. The unfortunate part for the male is his phallus is inside out. Think of a glove where you pulled it off and it turns inside out, a rubber glove or a latex glove. They turn inside out. Well, think of that, because his phallus is inside his body. It doesn't stick out, it doesn't protrude. So to get it to protrude, it takes all his blood to pop it out, and then he mates with the queen. But it took all his energy to do that, all his blood. And I'll explain the blood system to you. And then what happens is, he faints. He actually falls backwards and faints. And the phallus stays embedded in the female, and he drops dead. So it's one big orgasm, and then you die. And that's the life of a drone. Anyway, that's the truth. That's the way it goes. And she'll mate with up to 15 or 20 drones. And that's
They
it.
die with a smile on
They
their face.
die happy, yeah. With happy thoughts. Anyway, that's pretty well it. There's lots of things I'd like to talk about more. What can I say? I brought some honey for you to taste.
So their wasps have no purpose on this earth.
Oh yeah, everything has a purpose. Wasps will eat. Wasps are carnivores. They'll eat other insects. They'll eat flies. You know, like if you lived in a farm in the old days, you'd see the wasps coming underneath your porch, eating the flies. Yeah.
So what kind of bees do we have these last years with the long stinger tail? I don't know what they're called.
That's a northern paper wasp.
Yeah.
It's very slow. It doesn't sting you. It just bumbles around.
Yeah, we didn't
There's
used
two
to have
queens.
those.
There's two queens usually per nest, and they're a tiny little umbrella nest, maybe that big around. That's all they do. They just recycle those cells all summer. It's a northern paper wasp, and you can go and you can touch them. They don't sting you. They will sting you if you squish it, but they're not aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with it. I know the bumblebees and the alfalfa leaf cutters and the blue orchard mason bees are around us here, and they're the wild bees, but they're solitary insects. They just lay their eggs and give them enough honey and pollen. When that egg hatches in next spring, it eats that honey and pollen and then it comes out. The orchard mason bee is interesting because the little nest box like you see over there, it's got all kinds of little, I don't know if that one has, and that's a bird nest, is it?
It is.
Yeah. You could buy these at Costco at one time. They all have little bamboo
Oh, I saw those.
tubes in
I
there.
saw those. Yeah.
Well, if you look carefully, I've got one at my time, my wife had it, and if you look at the tubes, there's mud on the end of the tube. that's the blue orchid mason bee. They call them mason bees because they pack their hive with mud. And the last ones that they lay in there, the last eggs they lay in there are the males. So the males come out first in the springtime, and they wait for the females to hatch, and they mate with them, and then those females do the same thing. They pack those little holes with eggs and honey and pollen, but they're solitary bees.
There's your wasp.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of northern
Third
bees.
one over, third rafter over, you got one in there making your hive, just like your story.
Yeah, and there's something over there too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're all pollinators, the mason bees, honeybees,
Yeah.
bumblebees, they're all pollinators.
Yeah, they all
They're all useful.
pollinate.
They're
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
Matter of fact, bumblebees are a better pollinator than a honeybee.
Yeah, they are, because they actually shape the plant and it gets the pollen on them. They are better pollinators, but dollar for dollar, you're much better off pollinating with honeybees.
Yep.
I mean, you go to at that time of the year, like for example, I pollinate
Blueberries.
wild blueberries, low bush blueberries, wild blueberries. And take a bumblebee, they don't forage very far. They'll, like a spot around their own little hive. But there's only a clutch of them in there. There might be 75 bumblebees in there. And that's all there is to it. With this, you're going there and you've got 40,000 bees. Well, I mean, that just outperforms the bumblebees all the way. They can't beat 40,000 to 1. But 40,000 to 75, I should say.
So when you see, like in a blueberry field, all kinds of boxes,
Yeah.
do people normally rent the bees?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
$150 a hive, right?
Yep.
$150.
It's hard work because
Oh,
you
yeah.
look at a man his age who's pulling out 140 hives at 3 o'clock in the morning or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
bringing them up to Neguac
Yeah.
or even
Tracadie.
Tracadie, and bringing them up there, and you're signing contracts every year with the blueberry growers, and then you take them off and you bring them to the cranberry growers,
And then they poison the hell out of them.
and they poison the hell out of the cranberries.
Yeah.
So they don't do that anymore.
I guess
No,
I just kind of assumed that everybody that had a farm had their own.
no, they can't. No, it's too
Yeah.
complicated for them.
Yeah.
They're specialists in what they do.
Right.
And they've tried, some of them have tried, some of them have been able to do it, but it's very labor intensive,
Yep.
beekeeping.
It is.
Very labor intensive. Like,
But it's kept him young. He's 90 years old.
well, you're getting close.
Yeah, I know.
How old do you think I am?
I know.
70.
I'll be 80 in November.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah,
So
so
do you
let's,
rub honey on your face or?
no,
What's your secret?
my mother was the same as me. She used to put bear grease on her face.
There's that other stuff that you were talking about that comes from the trees. That's what you're
Propolis.
Propolis.
That's what you're using.
Yeah.
So to protect ourselves, and I don't usually wear anything, I rarely get stung, but for new beekeepers, I always tell them, make sure you wear a veil, because getting stung in the face isn't as much fun as it used to be. If it was ever fun.
One
Anyhow.
time Carla encouraged me to open the beehive, and it was a cloudy, cool morning.
Yeah.
Well, I did. I got stung 5 times, ears, neck,
Oh.
whatever.
Yeah.
I was running. I'll close it up in a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you always have to smoke them before you start, and that kind of, it doesn't calm them down, it causes havoc. They can't
Focused on
communicate.
something else other than
Yeah.
you then.
well,
So if you
Yeah.
have bees nests around where you don't want them, like here, would you smoke them out or just spray stuff or?
Swarms.
Yeah.
That's their method of reproduction, is swarming. What happens is they get so full of bees in there, and there's an old fellow back at Snellegrove, I think his name was, explained it better than the scientists can. The scientists say when the hive gets too packed with bees, too many bees in there, they can't pass the queen pheromones around enough in there. But actually Snellegrove explained it much better than that. I think he was an Englishman. He said when the hive is full of honey and it's all full of larvae and pupa and eggs, and there's no more room for the queen to lay eggs, those little feed the larvae. Well, there's no more larvae to feed because that's it. She can't lay any more eggs. Then the ones that produce wax, well, the honey is full of wax anyway. They don't need it. Fill it because it's full of honey and they've waxed it over, so they can't produce wax. So all these bees are in there. They've got nothing to do. And somehow it triggers them. Maybe it is the pheromones, like the scientists say, but Snellegrove explains it much better. They say, hey, it's time to get out of here. So what they do, they build queen cells. They start feeding young larvae. Nothing but royal jellies, about maybe 15 or 20 cells they'll build to make sure they have enough. And like I say, first one that hatches normally kills the rest. Sometimes 2 or 3 will hatch at the same time. They'll fight it out. Yeah, and then what happens is just before those queens hatch, they'll take off. Half to 2/3 of the hive takes off with the old queen. They stop feeding her, so she slims down because she's heavy. She can't fly very well. But they'll stop feeding her. She slims down, stops laying altogether, and when she slims down, she's how do they say it? She's an uncooperative victim of the worker bees. They're the ones that decide when to swarm. So then they they chase her and they make her run, and she slims down even more, and then they leave. And they'll go and hang not too far away from a bush or something, or on a fence post or somewhere, that whole cluster of them. And that's when they're at their tamest.
Yep.
Because they've got nothing to defend. They don't have a home. Then scout bees go looking for a new place to make a home. Like I've got a lot of empty equipment around my yard. I just saw a swarm in there. I never noticed, but I walked by, oh, bees, look at that. The bees are flying like hell back and forth out of this empty equipment I had. So I got myself a swarm without even knowing it. But normally you can go and get them. You could pick them up with your hands and then get stopped. Then they're not interested in staying. They're interested in finding a new home.
My daughter was helping me out. She does, plus there's some of you met her, Alana, beekeeper's daughter. We were walking in the middle of a swarm, and I said, don't worry about it, because she has long hair. I said, just have your hair put on the ball cap. They're not interested in you. And you're walking in the middle of 15,000 bees out trying to coax them to come down to a rose bush instead of a 30-foot tree.
Yeah, I know.
If you can catch the queen at that point gently and put her somewhere, you can get
They will follow the queen.
Yeah. If you watch the front of the hive, if you're a beekeeper and you see a cloud of bees coming out of the hive, and they make a racket.
Yes, they do.
A big you know when they're swarming.
Yep.
And you'll see the cloud of them. But anyway, if you go and watch the front of the hive, you'll see the queen walk out. So if you can grab her quickly enough and not hurt her, put her in a queen cage and tie her to a bush or something, they'll all go and huddle around her. Then you just shake her into a hive and that's it. Shake the bees into the hive, put her in there. And if you have, like sometimes up in a tree, like Andre says, what I do to catch them, well, I learned a lesson. A woman called me and said, I got a swarm in my backyard. Could you come and help me? She's frightened to death of them. They were up in a little birch tree, but that big around. So one of the neighbors came over and he had a ladder, so I thought, okay, I'll go up. So I leaned the ladder up against the tree, step ladder. I got up and I gave the branch a good shake and it came down. And I had a piece of cloth in front of them. Vinyl it was. So the bees all fell on that, not too many went in the hive. But all of a sudden they start marching in, and just like soldiers, thousands of soldiers marching in. And on the backside of the bees, the female workers, they have a gland there called the Mazanov gland. And that's the come here gland. This is the way home. That's what they do. What they do is they fan their wings over that Mazanov gland, and they all line up, and it looks like soldiers marching in.
That's interesting.
They all line up. It's incredible to watch them go march. Thousands and thousands of bees.
And in front of the hive, they'll be lined up. Some of them will stay right there and fan the pheromones out as well.
They'll stay right in the front of the hive when they found the entrance. They'll stay right there, and any other bees that are around or up in the trees, this pheromone will drift to them, and they'll come down and they'll go in too. But they stay, like you'll see a bunch of them right in front of the hive, standing there fanning that Mazanov gland. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. But I was up on that ladder to catch. I shook them down 3 times. I got them down there. The first thing you know, they're all back up in the same place.
Swing's still up there.
So the 3rd time I went up, you know what the top step on the ladder?
Yeah.
It's just no step.
Yes.
I went up on that. And then I said, I'm going to give them a good shake this time. And I gave them a good shake, and down they went.
Did you go down too?
Not right away. But after 3 times up there, I was in my 70s at that time. 3 times up that ladder, I was getting pretty confident about it. All of a sudden, the ladder went out from underneath me, and I went over backwards.
Oh my goodness.
The bottom rung of the ladder caught me across the buttocks. I had a black and blue ass for
Oh
about
my
a month,
Yeah.
and I still suffer from it a bit. I do have a cripple sticker for my car, but I'm getting around a lot better than I was.
Paul has a reputation among beekeepers
Yeah.
as a man who
He'll try anything.
well, he does. You know, he has a few broken bones and dislocated shoulders.
Oh yeah, that happened to me too.
Well, that's at this point. The last time I tried it, I almost felt like that.
Yeah.
And a ladder's
not
not a
worth
place for a 70-year-old man to be up.
No.
And so if the bees are swarming that high, I just say to hell with you.
Well, I found a way to do it. They're way up there sometimes, so I get a monkey wrench and I tie it on,
Fling it.
fling it up over the big long rope, and it goes up over their branch and back down, and I just let it come down. I grab it.
Oh, a lever. There you
Yeah,
go.
so we've caught 4 swarms in my backyard. I work at the University of New Brunswick with this doctor who threw in a couple of other folks there. So they were there and they had their students with them. I do a little show for them every springtime and fall when the new students come in. Yeah, so I don't climb anymore. That's,
When they go up in a small tree, what we've done is we've cut the tree off after roping it
Yeah.
as high as we can, and then lowered the tree down.
yeah.
That's a bit safer.
This woman says to me, by the way, she ended up being a 3rd cousin of mine. I never met her in my life. Her father was my mother's cousin. Anyway, I asked her name. She says, Richard. Oh, she's up with you. I'm sorry. She said, no, but my maiden name was Thibault. Oh, Thibault. What was your father? She said, come in. No, for God's sakes. He was a...
Yeah.
Did you ever go anywhere when you were a kid and someone didn't say, well, who's your father? Where are you from?
That was my mother. She would stand in the church steps and ask anybody she didn't know, who are you? Where did you come from? What was your father's name?
Yeah.
And when she died, the priest was in the graveyard. No, he came to the funeral parlor and saying prayers for her. Can you imagine now, Elizabeth? She's up in heaven there, saying to face of God, saying, "Who's your father?" Yeah. Anyway.
Dr. Scott McFarlane is a beekeeper up in a vet specializing in beekeeping up in Newcastle and Sheep, and he's developed a way to vacuum the hive very
Yeah.
gently into 5-gallon drums.
Yeah.
So the reproduction is when the hive swarms. When the queen mates, that's not reproduction per
No,
se.
no.
It's more like cell division.
It is, yeah. We don't think of individual bees in the hive, except for the queen and the drones. But we don't. The individual bees are not what we focus on. We focus on the super organism. That's the organism. Super organism.
That's a one-shot deal.
Yeah. Anyway, we consider this as the organism, the whole compound of it.
Because one doesn't work
The
without
colony.
the other, so it
No.
all has to be in.
Yeah, they work in cooperation with each other. That's how I got into beekeeping, by the way. I was going to do a master's degree in business administration. I had a commerce degree, a bachelor of commerce degree in undergraduate. And I kind of liked the idea of organizational behavior. And I heard about bees and how they cooperated with each other. And I wanted to do a master's degree and write a semi-fictional book about how humans could learn from bees to work together rather than fight with each other all the time, trying to get ahead and put the other guy down and trying to climb the ladder of success sort of thing. Anyway, they work incredibly well. But it's all age related. As they get older, they have different tasks to perform. The most important bee we actually have in the bee is the winter bee. And it's quite a bit different than the summer bees. Summer bees only last 6 weeks. The winter bees, when the queen starts laying eggs in mid-August to the end of September, those are the bees that are going to survive the winter. Because the queen stops laying eggs in October, sort of thing. So they don't have any larvae to feed. So they don't waste these enzymes that are not finite, they're not infinite, they're finite, they run out of them. Did I explain that to you? That when they run out of this, yeah, they can't digest pollen.
Yeah.
So these bees, they can digest pollen, and what they do is they store that as body fat, vitellogenin, I think it's called. That's the body fat that they have, they store it for the winter. And then in the spring, they somehow regurgitate this and they feed the larvae the fat. So then they start dying off because eventually they run out of this vitellogenin, which is keeping them alive. And then you're hoping that the young bees, you don't have cold snaps in May, that'll kill them. Did I explain that? Yeah. Oh, because when you have a cold snap, they form a cluster. Yeah, I did. To stay warm.
Yes, yes.
And the eggs and the larvae that are outside that cluster, they perish. Yeah, so honey.
I have to leave.
Taste the honey.
Yes.
Yes. The island.
So, Odette,
Calling me honey?
Yeah.
I see a
Oh,
gray
honey,
paper
bless your
nest.
Yes.
That's a wasp.
Yes.
It's not a honeybee at
No,
all.
it is
No,
not a
I'm
honeybee.
working for a
And
second.
the gray paper wasp nest is a totally different animal.
Altogether.
Honeybee, when it stings, you don't really
You
feel
you want to
pain.
scrape it off with the back of your fingernail.
Yeah, you scrape it off, but
You don't pull
really
it out,
feel pain.
scrape it off.
And it can only sting once. A wasp can sting you 5 times and then look for another spot to sting you another 5 times, and that hurts. A wasp hurts.
How much?
Different animal.
Okay.
Anyway, nice to see everybody.
Thank you,
Oh, you're not
Barbara.
running, you're not gonna have a taste?
No, thank you very much.
Blueberry
I'll
honey?
get it, I'll get it.
Oh,
I'll
blueberry
have
honey.
hers. I guess.
Blueberry honey?
No, I gotta go, really.
It has a little bit of a zing to it.
I'll go home and have a glass of wine.
Thanks,
Nice to
Paul.
meet
We
you.
make mead too out of honey.
Cool.
You didn't take these from your mother, did you? Doesn't every mother collect old spoons?
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. No, bought these at Sobeys. Now, this is the very early spring honey, and the flavor to me is definitely dandelion. So just dip in there and twirl your spoon around, so you don't drip it on you. And just lay your spoon flat there and it'll stop dripping. There you go.
Oops, sorry, Pat.
Twist it around. Stop dripping.
Yeah, no, say that to them. It's not pasteurized, Mike.
Has a different flavor than store-bought. Store-bought, they put everything together
Tastes like
as
honey.
one flavor.
And beaucoup du miel dans le magasin, c'est des miels autochtones. Ça fait qu'ils vendent du miel, disons, à Co-op, and it's a blend. They say from Brazil, from Canada, not from Co-op at Costco.
I bought some from
And
this
this is
wife.
blueberry honey. Notice you're allowed to dip in there, but you're not allowed to dip twice.
I don't know if he separates. His wife, she died a few years ago, but she used to separate. She'd have blueberry honey, and it's got a little bit of cayenne. It's got a zing.
This is blueberry honey.
Yeah.
Blueberry.
I just haven't bottled it yet.
You bring it out to a blueberry field.
Ok. Et des gros taste. Et la saveur du miel va prendre qu'est-ce qui est
Oui,
fleur.
parce qu'il rentre.
You don't have to
Les
be
abeilles
a
rentrent
connoisseur
avec la
to
Yeah,
saveur
that's
du
the
bleuet.
taste.
And you don't have to be a connoisseur to know the difference. They're really different. Most honeys are. Buckwheat, you
Are
go
very
into a
dark,
buckwheat
yeah.
field, the flowers are pure white. The honey is black.
Yep. Tastes like molasses.
Yeah. It's,
Tastes like molasses.
You're gonna get used to the flavor of it. My wife used to love it.
I do too.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in water content? Because I noticed that one's thicker than,
This one is thicker?
this one's thicker than the spring one. That's just me, but that's.
No, they should be about the
They-
same
yeah,
water
yeah.
content.
But
I remember I,
Comment ça?
There's a difference, big difference.
Ça, c'est bon pour les crêpes. Pour les crêpes.
Ah oui, ah oui.
Ah oui.
I remember I bought
Fancy pancakes.
Paul, I remember I bought, I think it was about a gallon off of blueberry honey.
J'essaie de différence.
Blueberry honey, I bought some off
Ça, c'est
Amazon.
comme,
It was, it almost had like a little bit of a peppery zing to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was really nice.
C'est vraiment, I was just gonna say, c'est vraiment.
Yeah, if there are any questions, I can answer.
Faites une explanation avec.
Any questions?
Oh, I came in
Oh,
late.
thank you very much for your presentation.
De rien.
pancake.
La crêpe, on peut.
I'll help you pack that up.
Je sais pas si j'ai oublié quoi, là. I'll show you Queen
So,
Cake.
so do you teach, like individual beekeepers who want to start up?
Well, I'm a mentor, they
Yes.
call.
He's my mentor.
Yeah, but they're opening a school in Moncton, I'll be the dean of beekeeping.
Oh, wait.